He was dressed sharp, posture confident, driving a sleek sedan through a city that didn't expect someone like him behind the wheel of power. When the red and blue lights flared in his rearview mirror, he didn't flinch. He knew his rights, had nothing to hide, and carried credentials that could stop a room cold. But none of that mattered. Not here. Not now. Not with a uniformed officer already convinced that the truth could be bent to fit his suspicion. What began as a routine traffic stop spiraled into a humiliating public takedown, a brutal cycle of injustice unfolding in broad daylight. They saw a black man with too much composure, too much success, and decided he had to be lying. They tore apart his dignity, mocked his silence, buried his name. And for 6 agonizing days, he let them. But they never asked the right question. They never stopped to wonder who they were really dealing with. This isn't just a story about race, power, or the system. It's about what happens when arrogance collides with truth and the reckoning that follows. If you're hooked already, don't forget to like and subscribe for the full series. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what moment hit you hardest. This story isn't just something to watch, it's something to feel. Darius Vell adjusted the cuffs of his navy suit as he steered his black Lexus LS 500 down Lexington Avenue, the streetlights reflecting off the sleek exterior like flickers of a spotlight. The dashboard clock read 5:47 p.m., and he was ahead of schedule for a charity gala that started at 7. He wasn't just a guest, he was a keynote speaker, and his speech on national security had taken him 3 nights to craft. Traffic was merciful for Manhattan, and Darius mentally rehearsed his opening lines. Then, behind him, red and blue lights flared against his rearview mirror like a warning siren from a bad dream. A cruiser surged forward, horn blaring twice. Instinctively, Darius signaled and pulled into the drop-off lane in front of the Montcalm Region Hotel. He glanced around, hoping it was a mistake, that the officer would pass. He didn't. The siren cut out as the police car parked directly behind him. Darius sat still, heart suddenly hammering, gripping the steering wheel loosely but purposefully. He looked to his left and right, pedestrians, bellhops, guests with rolling luggage, some already turning their heads toward the lights. A tall officer emerged from the car, face tight, body language sharp. Chadwick Rowe, late 40s, built like a lineman, a face molded by scorn and familiarity with dominance. He approached with one hand on his holster, the other on his flashlight, eyes slicing into Darius like he had already decided something. Darius lowered his window smoothly. "Good evening, officer." "Is there a problem?" he asked, voice calm, neutral, practiced. Chadwick didn't answer right away. He leaned in, eyes darting from Darius's face to his car's leather interior, then to the digital dashboard. "Nice car," he said, his voice as dry as a cracked window pane. "Yours." Darius nodded slowly, fighting the urge to explain too much. "Yes, sir. Registered under my name. I have the documents ready." "Step out," Chadwick snapped, his voice rising without cause. "Excuse me?" Darius asked, confusion knitting his brow. "License and registration, now." Darius obliged, moving slowly, narrating each movement with precision. No sudden moves. He passed the ID and registration through the open window. Chadwick snatched them, glanced at the ID, then at Darius again. "Darius Vell. What do you do, Mr. Vell?" "I'm a senior agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," Darius replied evenly. Chadwick scoffed. "Is that so? What's the FBI doing in Midtown, flashing cars like a rapper?" He stepped back, waved toward his cruiser. "Let's see what else you're hiding." Another patrol car rolled up seconds later, lights still spinning. Officers Reed and Delaney Sharp stepped out, hands on their belts. Chadwick gestured to the car, loud enough for bystanders to hear. "Possible stolen vehicle. Driver claims to be federal." Darius sighed inwardly. The situation was snowballing. Reed looked uncertain. Delaney wore a thin-lipped smile that said she didn't buy a word of what Darius claimed. Chadwick unbuckled the holster on his hip, his voice rising. "Out of the vehicle. Hands on the hood." Darius complied, stepping out slowly, raising his hands. The moment he did, Chadwick grabbed his wrist, twisted it back, and shoved him chest first onto the car's hood. The impact knocked the breath from him. Cold metal met tailored fabric. Cameras flashed. A few teenagers across the street were filming. Someone gasped. "Hey, what's he done?" someone asked. Chadwick ignored the voices. "Resisting," he barked, twisting the other arm into place. "Not at all," Darius winced. "I'm cooperating fully." "Yeah, I've heard that before," Delaney muttered, moving around to the passenger door. She began opening compartments, inspecting nothing in particular. Reed stood back, frowning faintly but saying nothing. Chadwick yanked Darius backward, snapped cold cuffs around his wrists, and forced him toward the squad car. The pain in his shoulder blazed. Darius didn't resist. He couldn't. He looked toward the hotel entrance. A valet manager stared, stunned. Another staffer clutched a phone, filming. "Let's see how federal you really are," Chadwick said. The back seat of the cruiser swallowed Darius whole. Chadwick climbed into the front, glanced at the license and registration again. "FBI badge looks real. Good fake," he said, chuckling. "Ever hear of a little charge called impersonating a federal officer?" Darius remained silent. He counted his breaths. He reviewed badge numbers. He memorized every officer's name tag. The door slammed shut, cutting off the world outside. The ride to the precinct was short but endless. Chadwick kept the radio volume low, ignoring dispatch to banter with Delaney over the speaker. "Thought you said Midtown was quiet tonight. Guess we caught a big fish." Reed remained silent. At the precinct, Darius was walked through booking like a low-tier felon. People glanced up from their desks, but no one intervened. A sergeant looked at his ID, frowned, and passed it to Chadwick without a word. The badge case wasn't even opened. "Put it in the locker," Chadwick said. Delaney did, dropping the leather holder like it was gum off the sidewalk. "Cell 6, Chadwick ordered. They passed open holding areas, men already crammed inside, but Cell 6 was empty. Darius was pushed inside, hands still cuffed. The door clanged shut. He sat on the edge of the bench, palms sweating. The walls were pale concrete, stained and cold. No one explained the charges. No one asked questions. The only thing louder than his thoughts was the shame burrowing in. He had spent his career upholding justice. Now he was the target of a system he once defended. Outside the cell, Chadwick laughed with someone down the hall. Darius stared at the floor, at the way his shoes no longer gleamed under fluorescent lights, at the scuff on his pants where he hit the car. No one had asked about it. No one had cared. Outside the cell, Chadwick Rowe leaned on the desk, spinning Darius's ID in one hand while sipping from a coffee cup. He hadn't even looked at the badge tucked behind the ID. Officer Delaney Sharp leaned over his shoulder, peering at the documents like they were novelties. "He really went all in with this one," she said, amusement thick in her voice. "A federal badge? Full credentials." Chadwick scoffed. "Fake, obviously. Nobody legit rides around like that. He probably bought it online with his suit." Delaney laughed, too loud, glancing at the cell with a sneer. Darius didn't react. He kept his eyes down, jaw clenched. Speaking now would make it worse. He'd seen enough cases to know when egos were itching for confrontation. Any move, any word would be used against him. Chadwick turned to Reed, who sat silently at his station. "Hey, you want to bet this guy's record includes some priors? Maybe a weapons charge? Theft?" Reed didn't answer. He looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. His silence felt like betrayal. Chadwick rose and walked to the cell door. He tapped the glass with his knuckle. "Hey, suit guy, you ready to confess to whatever scam you're running?" Darius looked up, his voice calm. "I've done nothing wrong. You have my ID. Call my office. Ask for Director Saulbeck." Chadwick grinned like a cat playing with its prey. "Oh, we'll make some calls. Right after you've had a taste of humility." He turned to Delaney. "You want to do the honors?" Delaney grinned and unlocked the door. Darius stood as she entered. "Let's go," she barked, grabbing his arm. "Where are you taking me?" he asked. "Intake. Time for photos." The hallway was sterile, long and gray, the overhead lights buzzing faintly. Darius was led past officers who barely glanced his way. Every footstep echoed like a judgment. At the end of the corridor, He was turned to face a camera. The officer behind the desk didn't hide his boredom. Face forward. Click. Turn right. Click. Turn left. Click. Darius stared straight ahead, the camera's flash searing his dignity. It was mechanical, cold, and public. His mugshot would now be in the system, a stain he didn't earn. Next came the fingerprinting. The ink felt sticky on his skin. As his prints were taken, Delaney muttered under her breath, "I hope you like gray walls. You're going to be seeing them a lot." He didn't respond. The process was dehumanizing, each step stripping away more of his identity, more of the quiet power he had built across years of disciplined service. They walked back toward the cells, but this time they stopped. Chadwick waited in a side room. "This one's ours," he said, nodding toward a small, windowless room with one steel chair bolted to the floor. "Let's have a little chat." Delaney shoved Darius inside and left, locking the door behind her. Chadwick stepped in alone, folding his arms. "You think you're smart? That you can walk around in a suit, talk fancy, and flash a badge like it means something?" Darius didn't answer. He kept his posture steady, but the fatigue was creeping in. "Where'd you get the car?" Chadwick asked. "I own it," Darius replied. "I have documentation in the glove box." "Oh, I'm sure you do," Chadwick said, circling him. "You know what guys like you never get? It's not about how good you dress or how polite you act. You're still just another liar in a tie." Darius inhaled deeply, pushing down the fury. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "I've served this country longer than you've been on the force." Chadwick grinned, leaned in. "Then you'll enjoy the irony when you get booked under false identity. Try telling that story to your cellmate." Minutes passed after Chadwick left before Reed entered. He looked conflicted, glancing over his shoulder before stepping in. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but if you really are who you say you are—" "Check the badge," Darius said quickly. "Call Director Beck. My ID is real. I need access to a phone." Reed hesitated. "I'll see what I can do." And then he left. Darius waited, alone again. An hour passed. Then another. Dinner came in a plastic tray, lukewarm beans and 2 slices of dry bread. He forced it down. He had no choice. By the 3rd hour, his cell was refilled with other men, rowdy, loud, smelling of stale cigarettes and unwashed clothes. One man stared at him too long. The only people who could speak for him, his team, his director, even the bureau itself, had no clue he'd disappeared behind a badge. As morning crept in, he heard the sound of boots. Chadwick Rowe and Delaney Sharp returned, carrying a clipboard and fresh insults. "Time for round 2, Chadwick said, unlocking the cell. Darius stood slowly. Delaney grinned. "No breakfast until you tell us who you really are." They led him to the same interrogation room, the one with no windows and a single metal chair. Darius sat back straight. Chadwick slammed the clipboard on the table and leaned in close. "Let's talk about this badge," he said, waving Darius's federal credentials in front of him like a dog treat. "Looks pretty, I'll give you that. But it's a fake. You're no agent. You're a con artist with a good tailor." Darius didn't respond. He watched Chadwick like he was studying a suspect himself, measuring the man's words, looking for cracks. But there were none, just arrogance, unchecked and loud. "You know what I think?" Chadwick continued, pacing. "I think you've been pretending to be someone important your whole life. Dressing up, talking smooth, making people believe you're smarter than you are." He paused, voice sharp as a knife. "But you're nothing. Just a fraud who finally got caught." Delaney leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "He won't even crack," she said. "Bet he still thinks he'll walk out of here because of his connections." Chadwick laughed. "Yeah, let me guess your boss is going to swoop in, flash some badges, and we all go home with a slap on the wrist? You're in the real world now. This is our turf." Darius remained silent, but his jaw tightened. The room stank of coffee and contempt. Chadwick sat down across from him, lowering his voice. "You ever been to prison, Darius? Because where you're going, nobody cares how well your pants fit." Darius met his gaze. "I've done nothing wrong. You're violating protocol, and you know it." Chadwick leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You don't get to talk protocol. You gave up that right when you tried to play federal. He tapped the table. You want to stay here, fine. I'll make sure your name's buried so deep they won't find you until you're old and gray. Darius clenched his fists. You have my credentials. You've ignored every procedure. I demand to speak with legal counsel. Demand all you want, Delaney shot back. You'll speak when we say you can. The abuse wasn't physical now, but it cut deeper. Each insult was a reminder that dignity meant nothing without power. Darius had authority, but it had been stripped with his suit jacket. They only saw his skin, his silence, his restraint, and mistook it for weakness. Hours passed. They returned him to the cell without answers. The other inmates laughed when they saw him, whispering about the man in the wrinkled suit who sat straighter than anyone else. The humiliation festered. Reed passed by at one point, slowed, and paused. Darius stood and stepped forward. You said you'd help, he said quietly. Reed looked around. There's nothing I can do. Roe has this locked down. I'm sorry. Then call my director. Call the bureau. Give them my name. Reed hesitated. I'll try. Then he was gone. Darius slumped back onto the bench. Another hour. Then Chadwick returned with a tablet. He held it up, showing a grainy photo taken during the arrest, the one where Darius was forced onto the hood of his car. Already making rounds online, he said. People love a good scandal. Fancy man with a fake badge. He scrolled. Look, someone even tagged it. FBI impersonator caught outside luxury hotel. Delaney smirked. They're eating it up. Darius stared at the screen. His name wasn't mentioned yet, but his face was clear. The weight of it hit him like a second pair of cuffs. The narrative was being written without him. The world would see the photo and assume guilt. Not one headline would say he was the victim. Defamation, he said. You're building a false case. When this falls apart, you'll answer for it. Chadwick tapped the screen. No one's listening to you. You're a nobody with a badge you didn't earn. Then he turned the tablet off and left. For the rest of the day, Darius sat in silence. He refused the next meal. The guards stopped looking at him altogether. His body ached, his throat was dry, and still no one from the bureau came. With every passing hour, the humiliation grew. He thought of his team, his family, the years he'd spent proving his worth in rooms where no one looked like him. All undone by one stop. Any sign of resistance would be used as validation of the stereotype they were already eager to project onto him. His silence was his armor, but even armor has limits. The morning shift brought no relief. An older sergeant named Dalton strode into the booking area, clipboard in hand, reading from the intake list. Darius Vell, he muttered, squinting at the paperwork. Cell 6. He walked up to the bars, eyes locking on Darius's face. For a moment, something flickered across the man's expression, recognition perhaps, but then it vanished, smothered by years of bureaucratic apathy. Still claiming to be FBI, Dalton asked. Darius stood and approached the bars calmly. I'm not claiming anything. I am FBI. If you'll contact Director Saul Beck's office in D.C., he'll verify. Dalton held up a hand, cutting him off. We're not making personal calls for everyone who comes through here, Mr. Vell. I haven't been granted a single phone call, Darius said, more firmly. That's a violation of my rights. Dalton raised an eyebrow, then looked at the file again. Well, says here you were processed. Looks like everything's in order. I wasn't given a phone, nor was my ID verified properly, Darius pressed. Your officers have ignored every step of protocol. Dalton's face hardened. You people think you can walk in and start demanding things just because you wear a nice suit and know a few names. You want to talk about rights? You'll get them when we're damn good and ready. He turned and walked away, leaving Darius standing at the bars, blood pounding in his ears. The phrase, you people, echoed like a slur in the hallway. Darius returned to his bench, fists clenched, shoulders tight. Institutional racism wasn't a surprise. It was a reality he had long fought against within the Bureau, a systemic right he'd tried to correct by being the best, the most prepared, the most composed. But here, stripped of his tools, surrounded by bad faith and casual cruelty, His excellence only made him more of a target. Later that morning, an administrative clerk entered the evidence room to catalog items from the previous night's bookings. Delaney handed her a bag labeled with Darius's information. "Some joker thought he was FBI," she laughed. The clerk glanced inside the evidence bag, pausing at the federal badge holder. Her brows knitted. "This looks real," she said. Delaney shrugged. "Yeah, real from eBay." The clerk hesitated, then placed it on the shelf without question. Darius's only legitimate lifeline now sat buried behind other unexamined bags, labeled miscellaneous personal junk. Back in the holding cell, a young man was led in, a skinny kid, maybe 20, bruises blooming along his jawline. He sat beside Darius, exhaling loudly. "What you in for?" he asked. Darius didn't answer immediately. "Wrong place, wrong skin," he said quietly. The kid chuckled bitterly. "Ain't that always the case?" Later, during shift change, Chadwick returned with a printed report. He walked up to the bars and held it up like a trophy. "Well, Mr. Vell, looks like your story still isn't checking out. No one at the local field office confirms you're on the books." Darius's heart jumped. "Which field office?" "Brooklyn," Chadwick replied smugly. "You said you're based in D.C., Reed added from behind. "Did you call D.C.?" Darius asked. "The Central Bureau office? I gave you the number." "Brooklyn says no match," Chadwick said, ignoring the question. "So unless your fairy godmother is on her way, I'd say you're out of luck." Darius stepped closer to the bars. "Call the main line in Washington. Ask for Director Beck. Tell him it's urgent. Use my clearance code. It's on the back of the badge you took." Chadwick's eyes narrowed. "Don't tell me how to do my job." "Then do it," Darius replied, no longer pleading. "Properly." Chadwick stared him down. "We'll let you know if we feel like following up." He walked away, Reed trailing behind him. "Why won't you just call the D.C. office?" Reed asked as they left earshot. "Because," Chadwick muttered, "guys like him lie with a straight face. If we open that can, we got a deal with IA, paperwork apologies. Not my problem." In the hallway, the sergeant from earlier leaned over and whispered, "You sure this one's not who he says he is?" Chadwick replied, "I'm sure he's not worth the trouble of finding out." That afternoon, Darius was brought into a public holding area where detainees waited to be processed for court appearances. A dozen men sat slumped on benches. One of them pointed and laughed. "Look at Wall Street over here. What they get you for? Tax fraud." Darius said nothing. Another inmate spat at the floor near his shoes. "Bet he cried like a bitch when they locked him up." The guards did nothing. If anything, they smirked. One whispered, "Guy says he's federal." The laughter echoed through the room. The degradation didn't stop at mockery. When food was handed out, Darius's tray was missing. He asked the guard politely. The guard shrugged. "Try again tomorrow." He went another night without food. By now, his tie was gone. His shirt was torn at the sleeve. The polish on his shoes was scuffed to dullness. His back ached from the bench. Yet he didn't beg, didn't lash out, because he understood something more than they did. The truth, when it came out, wouldn't just vindicate him. Darius knew from years of interrogations that what they were doing wasn't about justice. It was about dominance, the ugly exercise of power when it's unchecked, when accountability feels optional. He sat in a chair in the corner of the holding area, chained to a metal ring bolted into the floor, the faint buzz of the precinct's overhead lights matching the static in his mind. Across the room, Delaney Sharp leaned over her desk, laughing with two other officers as they scrolled through something on a phone. Chadwick Rode joined them moments later, holding a cup of coffee and wearing the same smug expression he had worn since the arrest. "You see it," Delaney said, handing him the phone. Chadwick looked and burst out laughing. "No way. It's already viral. Uploaded last night," she confirmed. 20,000 views in 6 hours. The caption says, "Fake Fed busted in Midtown." Darius heard them clearly. He kept his eyes forward, but his heart raced. He could guess exactly what video they were watching. One of the bystanders must have uploaded the footage of his arrest. He imagined the shaky phone angle catching the moment he was slammed onto the hood of his own car, cuffed and dragged away in front of a crowd, the luxury hotel towering behind him like an ironic backdrop to his public humiliation. "Comments are brutal," one of the officers added. "Most folks think he's another scammer pretending to be someone important." "Because that's what he is," Chadwick declared, raising his voice slightly so that Darius could hear him. "Look at him now. You think a real FBI agent would still be rotting in here if he had real friends in high places?" The others laughed. One officer mimicked handcuffs. Another joked about getting Darius a jumpsuit. Chadwick's phone buzzed. He checked the screen and grinned. Local news wants a statement. Said they're airing the clip tonight on the 6 o'clock segment. Guess we're famous. Darius felt the bile rise in his throat. The story was spiraling out of control. Every hour he remained in custody, the lie grew stronger. The media now had a piece of the narrative, and the public would run with it. He had no voice to counter it, no contact with the outside world. The damage to his reputation, his career, even his family, none of that mattered to the people in this precinct. Their only concern was keeping the lie alive long enough for it to become permanent. A few hours later, he was escorted into a smaller office under the pretense of new questioning. The room was dark, a single desk and 2 chairs. Chadwick entered alone, carrying a printed article in his hand. He tossed it on the desk. "There you are, your 15 minutes of fame." The headline read, "FBI imposter caught in Midtown sting." A grainy photo of Darius being held down on the hood of his car stared back at him. The article cited unnamed police sources and included fabricated statements about Darius resisting arrest and providing false identification. Darius stared at the page, the photo frozen mid-movement, as if capturing his entire downfall in one stolen second. "Congratulations," Chadwick said. "Your legacy is now in print, and it's not even lunchtime." Darius looked up, calm but firm. "That article is slander. You're distributing lies to the public." Chadwick shrugged. "So sue me. I'm just doing my job." "No," Darius said. "You're using your badge as a shield to commit a crime. And when the truth comes out, you'll be remembered as the man who broke his oath for a headline." "Truth," Chadwick scoffed. "Truth doesn't trend. Video does. Articles do. You think people care about your clearance codes or who your boss is? No one's coming for you." He stood, smirking again. "But hey, enjoy your fame." The door closed. Darius was left alone again, the article still on the table, the ink smearing slightly under the sweat of his fingers. He looked down at the image of himself, his face twisted mid-motion, not with aggression, but pain. That moment, captured and broadcast, now defined him in the eyes of the public. Back in his cell, the guards passed by with trays of food, but Darius was skipped again. One of the younger inmates slid part of his own tray toward Darius, without a word. Darius accepted it with a nod of thanks. Even here, with nothing, the system's victims showed more humanity than the ones who ran it. That night, the television in the common area played the 6 o'clock news. Darius didn't need to see it. He heard his name, the word imposter, the mention of a luxury vehicle, the insinuation that he had targeted a high-profile location for credibility. His photo flashed again, handcuffed, head down, surrounded by uniforms. He felt every word like a nail driven into a coffin built for his character. The other inmates jeered, some laughed, others just looked confused. "That you?" one man asked. Darius didn't answer. A few minutes later, Reed passed by the holding area. He stopped and looked at the television, then at Darius. His face showed the first flicker of guilt. He moved away quickly, but the seed had been planted. Chadwick Rowe, still smug and satisfied, had begun fielding interviews off-record, playing the humble enforcer who just followed his gut. And now Darius had become something more dangerous than a criminal, a story. Once a narrative spreads, no truth can keep pace. The badge that should have freed him remained locked in an evidence locker labeled with sarcasm and carelessness. And though one or two employees at the precinct had begun to question what they were seeing, none stepped forward. The risk outweighed the responsibility. On the fourth morning, a new strategy emerged. Chadwick entered the interrogation room again, but this time he brought with him a precinct psychologist, a contract clinician named Dr. Petralang, who carried a small notepad and a soft smile. Darius had been summoned without context, led through the halls in cuffs, eyes averted from the jeers that still followed him. Inside the room, Chadwick gestured for him to sit. "We're concerned for your well-being," he said mockingly. "Dr. Lang's here to make sure you're not a threat to yourself or anyone else." Darius narrowed his eyes, not speaking. He knew this tactic well. Psychological evaluations were often used to justify extended detainment and worse, to paint resistance as mental instability. Dr. Lang gave him a polite nod. "Mr. Vell, I understand you've had a difficult few days. I'm here to talk, not interrogate. May I ask how you're feeling?" Darius remained silent. She waited a moment. "You've told officers you work for the FBI, but our verification hasn't found any evidence of that." "Because they haven't called the right office," he said finally, voice hoarse. "My credentials are being ignored. My badge is being hidden. I've been denied every legal right I'm supposed to have." Dr. Lang scribbled a note. "I understand you feel mistreated. Have you experienced anything like this before?" "No," Darius replied, "because I've spent my entire life doing everything right. Serving this country, upholding laws that officers like Rose spit on." "You feel targeted," she said calmly. "I am being targeted," he answered. "This isn't a delusion. It's an abuse of power." Dr. Lang looked at Chadwick. "I'd like a moment alone with him." Chadwick scoffed but stepped out. As the door clicked shut, Dr. Lang leaned forward. "Off the record, Mr. Vell, do you have any proof of who you say you are?" "Yes. In the badge they confiscated. And if anyone calls Director Solbeck at the DC field office, he'll verify everything. But no one has. Because if they do, this whole precinct burns in the fallout." She nodded slowly, then stood. "I'll make some inquiries." When the door opened, Chadwick was waiting, arms crossed. "He good? For now," she said simply and left. Later that day, Darius was left in the same holding cell as the previous nights. But now, something was different. The guards didn't just ignore him, they watched him closely. The lights above his bench were left on all night. At intervals, officers would tap on the glass or slam a tray near his door, jolting him from sleep. It was clear now they were trying to wear him down, not just physically but mentally. The longer he stayed silent, the more they prodded, looking for a reaction they could twist into justification. On the fifth night, an officer entered quietly, mounted a small camera in the corner of the room, and left without explanation. From that point forward, Darius was filmed constantly. He sat upright for hours, unable to rest fully, every move watched, recorded. In his mind, he replayed training videos from the academy, psychological endurance tests, interrogation tactics. But nothing prepared him for this kind of isolation, powerless, silenced, slandered. During mealtime, the officers mocked him openly. "You still want that steak dinner, Agent Vell? He probably thinks this is some deep cover mission. Maybe we'll mail your next paycheck to Cell 6. The laughter never stopped. One officer mimicked his walk. Another took a selfie outside his cell. When the television replayed the news segment featuring his mugshot, the guards would pump the volume, making sure he heard every word. "You look great on TV," one sneered. "Shame you can't watch it from your luxury condo." The psychological assault wore him thin. There were moments, small, terrifying moments, when he questioned whether anyone would believe him if he did get out. The media had poisoned public opinion. The system had suppressed his identity. What if the Bureau itself assumed he'd gone rogue? He forced those thoughts away. He couldn't afford doubt. The sixth day of confinement began like all the others, with stale air, buzzing lights, and the distant clang of boots echoing through concrete hallways. But beneath the monotony, something had shifted. Darius Vell, though depleted, had begun to notice patterns in the chaos. Slight changes in officer behavior, whispers that stopped when he approached, lingering glances from those who once ignored him completely. Reed, the officer who had shown quiet reluctance from the start, passed by his cell that morning, and instead of walking past, he stopped. His eyes didn't hold the contempt that had filled Chadwick Rowe's every glance. Instead, they carried something unfamiliar: unease. "You might want to stay alert today," Reed said softly, not meeting Darius's gaze. "Things are changing." Before Darius could ask anything, Reed was gone, swallowed by the corridor. The words hung in the air like static. That same morning, in a cramped office on the second floor of the precinct, the young evidence clerk, who had remained silent for days despite her concerns, finally acted on the doubt gnawing at her since she first handled the confiscated badge. She'd done what no one else in the building had dared to do. She picked up the phone and called the FBI's Washington field office, using the main number listed in the federal database. "I have a badge here," she said cautiously, "belonging to someone named Darius Bell. He's been in our custody since Monday, but something doesn't feel right." The voice on the other end went still, then sharp. "Vel, you're certain?" She gave the badge number, watching the screen in front of her flicker. After a brief pause, the voice returned, authoritative now, direct. "That's Deputy Director Vel. Do not move. What precinct are you at?" She gave the address. The call ended. 23 minutes later, Director Saul Beck himself was on a secure call with the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Internal Affairs. Within the hour, the DOJ issued an emergency federal notification, and a federal task force was mobilized from Quantico. In Midtown, officers at the precinct felt the shift. Phone lines lit up. A black SUV with government plates parked outside, followed by 3 more. Agents in dark suits and flak jackets stepped out with quiet precision. Inside the station, Reed was the first to see them. He blinked, then moved down the hall, stopping near Darius's cell. He looked shaken. "You were telling the truth," he said. Darius looked up slowly. "I told you that days ago." "They're here," Reed added. "The Bureau. The Real Bureau." In the main office, Chadwick Rowe stepped into the hallway, blinking at the commotion. "What the hell is going on?" he asked. No one answered. Delaney Sharp looked up from her desk, her mouth slightly open as she watched federal agents enter the building with solemn focus. Agent Monroe, second in command under Director Beck, approached the front desk, flashing his credentials. "We're looking for a man named Darius Bell. We have reason to believe he's being unlawfully detained." The clerk at the desk stammered. Chadwick stepped forward. "There's been a misunderstanding. The man we've got in holding, he claimed he was Bureau, but his ID didn't check out." "It checked out," Monroe said coolly. "You just didn't know who to call." "We did what we thought was appropriate," Chadwick said, suddenly less certain. "We have procedures. You ignored procedure," Monroe said. "You detained a senior federal officer, denied him communication, and disseminated false information to the media. That's obstruction, Officer Rowe." Chadwick's face went pale. Delaney stood up, eyes wide, mouth opening to object. But the weight of the room had shifted. Power no longer lived behind her badge. It had returned to where it belonged. "Take us to him," Monroe said. Chadwick hesitated. "He's in cell 6. Agents moved. Darius heard the door before he saw the suits. The metal swung open and 2 federal agents entered, their presence like thunder. "Deputy Director Bell," one of them said. "Sir, we're here to bring you out." Darius stood slowly, body stiff, eyes heavy with disbelief and exhaustion. "It took you long enough," he said quietly. "We received no alerts," the agent replied. "They buried everything. But we're here now." As they led him out of the cell, the entire station watched. Delaney Sharp stepped back as he passed. Reed stood frozen, guilt carved into every line of his face. Chadwick stared, face taut with disbelief. "You can't seriously," he started, but Monroe cut him off. "You're done talking." Darius walked through the building, his posture straighter with each step. He didn't look back. The sun outside was sharp, but not blinding. The doors opened and the light hit him like a rebirth. Cameras snapped. Not bystanders, but federal documentation. His team stood waiting near the SUVs, a medic ready with water and questions, a staffer holding fresh clothes. Monroe walked beside him. "Sir, Director Beck wants you debriefed immediately. IA is preparing a full investigation. Everyone involved will be dealt with." Darius nodded, barely hearing. He had endured the worst of what his country's system could throw at him. Now the reckoning would begin. Purposeful, loaded with suppressed fury and professional restraint. Darius Vell, now dressed in clean bureau-issued attire, sat upright in the backseat, flanked by two agents who had known him for years. They didn't speak unless necessary, not out of coldness, but reverence. What had happened to Vell was beyond a breach of protocol. It was a disgrace that tainted every law enforcement badge in the building that let it occur. As the convoy sped toward the Bureau's New York field office, Monroe updated Director Beck over a secure line. "He's stable, sir. But the situation is worse than we anticipated." The officers fabricated charges, ignored multiple verification attempts, and distributed slanderous media content. All surveillance records have been collected. We're activating a full internal investigation. IA teams are en route. At the field office, Darius was welcomed like a returning soldier. Agents lined the hall not out of ceremony, but solidarity. He nodded to them, acknowledging their silent support, but his eyes remained sharp. He had endured 6 days of humiliation, psychological warfare, and illegal detainment. Now it was time for consequences. Inside the conference room, Director Beck stood at the head of a table, flanked by attorneys, division chiefs, and senior investigators. He moved to Vell immediately. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "This should never have happened." Darius nodded. "But it did." Beck gestured to a chair. "We're ready to begin the debrief." For the next 3 hours, Darius detailed every moment of his arrest and confinement, from the traffic stop outside the hotel to the last-second rescue. The team listened without interruption. Every statement was recorded, cross-checked against officer reports, and compared to security footage that had been quietly collected from the hotel, the precinct, and the bystanders' viral videos. What emerged was damning. The Midtown precinct had not only violated basic civil rights, but actively conspired to bury a federal identity. The evidence locker held his real badge, untouched since day one. Communications logs showed no attempts to contact the DC office, despite his repeated requests. Multiple officers, including Chadwick Rowe and Delaney Sharp, were recorded mocking Vell's arrest, obstructing verification efforts, and spreading misinformation to media contacts. The internal affairs lead, a hard-nosed investigator named Salcedo, turned to Beck after reviewing the files. "This isn't just misconduct. It's malicious. They didn't just ignore him. They used his race and demeanor as justification for abuse. If we don't handle this publicly, we'll be complicit." Beck nodded. "Then we go public." By sunset, the Bureau's press office issued a national statement. Deputy Director Darius Vell, a decorated federal agent with over 15 years of service, had been wrongly arrested and detained without cause by officers from the Midtown precinct. The statement condemned the incident, cited violations of federal law, and confirmed that full disciplinary and legal action was underway. Chadwick Rowe, Delaney Sharp, and 5 others were placed on immediate administrative leave. An arrest warrant for obstruction and unlawful detainment was prepared for Rowe, who had already been pulled from his shift and confined to the precinct under watch. Delaney Sharp, pale and shaking, was escorted from her apartment by federal agents and informed of pending charges. She offered no resistance, only stammered that it had been a misunderstanding. But the evidence showed otherwise. That night, the same media outlets that had smeared Vell's name were forced to pivot. The video of the arrest was re-aired, but now with updated captions: "Federal agent illegally detained. Deputy Director victim of police abuse." Social media, once filled with sneering comments, turned on itself. Influencers issued apologies. Community leaders demanded answers. The public's attention shifted rapidly from mockery to outrage. Darius watched none of it. He remained at the field office, quietly reviewing case notes, preparing testimony, and answering questions from the DOJ. When Monroe returned with updates, Vell asked only one question: "Have they confessed?" Monroe shook his head. "Rowe's still claiming you resisted arrest. He says he suspected a scam and followed standard procedure." Darius scoffed. He created a lie to feed his bias, then protected it like truth. That's not just failure. That's intent." Monroe nodded. "And we're proving it." The next morning, Rowe was brought into a federal interrogation room. This time, he was on the other side of the table. Agents presented timelines, videos, statements from other officers, including Reed, who had finally admitted that he'd known the truth was being buried. "I didn't know how to stop it," he said. Rowe had everyone scared. "But you knew it was wrong?" the agent asked. Reed nodded. "Yes, I knew." Delaney Sharp, questioned separately, admitted under pressure that they had dismissed Vell's ID as fake without verification and joked about how easy it was to break someone who dressed too well to be real. The clerk who made the crucial call to the Bureau was commended, offered protection, and later promoted. Her courage had cracked the silence that had nearly swallowed the truth. Within 48 hours, charges were filed. Chadwick Rowe was arrested for unlawful detainment, obstruction of justice, falsification of reports, and civil rights violations. Delaney Sharp faced similar charges, with added counts for harassment and evidence tampering. The precinct's command staff was placed under review. Internal Affairs opened 32 misconduct cases linked to prior arrests handled by Rowe. Darius, for his part, stayed focused. He issued one public statement, brief, measured, and direct. "This incident was not just about me. It was about the system that allowed prejudice to override truth and power to silence accountability. But justice doesn't yield to fear. It demands clarity, and clarity always finds its way." He declined interviews. He refused praise. What mattered now wasn't redemption. It was correction. Inside the Bureau, new training protocols were drafted. Cultural sensitivity workshops were mandated for precincts with high misconduct rates. A policy requiring immediate federal verification for claimed agents was implemented across departments. The reckoning had begun. The wheels of justice, though often slow and burdened by bureaucracy, turned swiftly in the wake of the revelations surrounding the illegal detainment of Deputy Director Darius Vell. Within days, federal prosecutors finalized the indictments against officers Chadwick Rowe and Delaney Sharp. The courtroom was prepared for arraignment under heightened security, and the public's attention, now razor-focused, filled every news cycle, every social feed, every water cooler conversation in law enforcement circles across the country. Darius, though exhausted, attended the first hearing, not out of vengeance, but to witness accountability in motion. The courtroom buzzed as Rowe was brought in, shackled, his usual swagger stripped away and replaced with the haunted stare of a man realizing the system he weaponized now stood poised to crush him. Reporters scribbled furiously as the federal prosecutor listed the charges: unlawful detainment, obstruction of justice, falsification of official records, violation of civil rights under color of law, and conspiracy to distribute defamatory content. Rowe sat still, jaw clenched, his attorney whispering urgently beside him. But the evidence was stacked high and solid. The viral video, the failure to verify identity, the testimonies of fellow officers, and the recorded locker room laughter made denial laughable. Delaney Sharp sat in the adjacent chair, equally grim, eyes red from either tears or sleepless nights, facing a nearly identical list of charges. She had tried to mitigate her role in her earlier statements, painting herself as a bystander rather than a participant, but the transcripts and video footage painted her as complicit in every humiliation Darius suffered. The judge, a steely federal appointee known for her intolerance of civil rights violations, denied both defendants bail. "The court finds compelling evidence that the accused knowingly abused their authority," she said, "and that they pose a risk of further obstruction." The room shifted as the officers were led away, shackled and silent, the flashbulbs of courtroom cameras documenting the reversal of power. Outside the courthouse, crowds had gathered, a mix of activists, former Bureau agents, and civilians incensed by the story. Posters reading "Justice for Vell" and "Power Must Answer" were hoisted in the air. Darius stepped to the podium only briefly, saying what he had rehearsed in silence for days. "This is not just about my name. It is about what happens when we allow prejudice to inform procedure, and when systems protect power over people. Justice is not vengeance. It is correction, and correction starts with accountability." That night, national headlines didn't just reflect the arrest. They celebrated it as a step forward, a rare moment where the system admitted failure and sought repair. Major networks ran specials on systemic bias in law enforcement, highlighting cases eerily similar to Darius's, cases that hadn't ended with rescue or redemption. Darius didn't shy away from these conversations. Instead, he agreed to participate in a closed session with the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, where he outlined the flaws exposed by his detainment and offered actionable reforms. His voice, once silenced behind a locked cell, now commanded the policy room. The Midtown precinct, once bustling and arrogant, fell into disarray. Half its leadership was reassigned. A temporary federal oversight team was installed. New training protocols rolled out immediately. And Officer Reed, who had broken his silence after the truth was revealed, was offered immunity in exchange for full cooperation in the ongoing investigation. He took it, attending hearings and providing internal documentation that revealed disturbing patterns in Roe's past cases. Dozens of questionable arrests, overlooked complaints, and falsified reports. Investigators quickly discovered that Darius wasn't the only one to suffer under Roe's authority. At least 14 prior detainees had been subjected to similar treatment. Racial profiling, verbal abuse, falsified charges, all swept under the rug by a precinct culture built on silence and camaraderie. Lawsuits followed. Some settled. Others gained traction in civil court, bolstered by Darius's case. The dominoes had started to fall. Meanwhile, Darius continued to serve. Beck had offered him extended leave, time to recover and reset, but he declined. "The work doesn't stop because I was stopped," he told his team. "Injustice doesn't rest. Neither do we." He resumed his duties with a sharp focus, visiting field offices, conducting seminars on ethics and accountability, and mentoring new recruits with a renewed sense of purpose. His presence became more than inspirational. It was a daily reminder that no badge, regardless of rank, should be immune to oversight. In one notable session with young agents, he spoke plainly. "Your badge is not a shield from scrutiny. It is a promise, a covenant with the public. You break that, you break everything we stand for." The agents listened, some nodding, others clearly rattled. But they listened. Across the country, police departments and federal branches initiated internal reviews. Training modules were updated to include lessons drawn directly from Darius's experience, now dubbed the Vell Incident, in internal bureau documents. And in media circles, Darius became a symbol not of victimhood, but vigilance. Interviews aired not about the humiliation, but about resilience. He emphasized process, reform, and the long road toward earned trust. "Justice," he said on a national broadcast, "is not a finish line. It's a commitment, one we must renew every day." Still, Darius remained humble. He refused awards, declined honorary titles, and never accepted compensation beyond his standard salary. His only demand was that those responsible face full legal consequences, and that the institutions they worked for never forget how close they came to burying the truth. As the first federal trial began, prosecutors used his story to highlight the ease with which power could be abused. Jurors sat spellbound as footage played, showing the arrest, the laughter, the dismissed badge, the ignored pleas. When asked to testify, Darius did so with precision. Not a single word was wasted. "I didn't need their respect," he said on the stand. "I needed their integrity, and they chose pride over truth." The jury found Roe and Sharp guilty on all primary charges. Sentencing would follow, but the message was already clear. Injustice had been named, confronted, and punished. Darius Vell left the courthouse that evening not as a victim, but as an embodiment of what perseverance looks like when truth finally has a voice. The courtroom buzz had faded. The headlines had slowed. The protests outside the Midtown precinct had long since dissolved into quiet, replaced by a rotating federal oversight task force and new leadership chosen from within a vetting pool committed to rebuilding a broken department. And yet, the impact of Darius Vell's ordeal rippled far beyond the confines of any office or courtroom. In the weeks following the conviction of Chadwick Roe and Delaney Sharp, The Bureau conducted a comprehensive audit of law enforcement agencies across the eastern seaboard. Hundreds of cases previously dismissed or downplayed were reopened, not just because of one man's suffering, but because the nation had finally been forced to see what that suffering represented. Darius, though never seeking it, became the face of that reckoning. Not for his pain, but for his endurance. Not for his victimhood, but for his relentless pursuit of reform without bitterness. He declined memoir offers, turned down lucrative speaking engagements, and instead requested a reassignment. He asked to return to field duty. "Desk work can't fix the street," he said simply. Beck hesitated, but approved. His rank was untouched, but his path had changed. The Bureau knew now that the system could only change from within if led by those who had survived its darkest corners. Darius requested his first reassignment to a precinct in Baltimore, an area known for complex community tensions and decades of mistrust between residents and law enforcement. He did not come with cameras. He arrived with a duffel bag, his credentials, and a resolve deeper than any policy manual could articulate. Within the first month, he initiated a program designed to bridge the divide between precincts and the communities they served. Operation Groundwork was not a campaign or a slogan. It was a strategy built on presence, transparency, and accountability. Officers were required to participate in weekly community forums, engage in real-time ride-alongs with oversight observers, and undergo mandatory bias and procedural retraining developed in collaboration with civil rights scholars. The program saw resistance. Officers grumbled. Some transferred. But Darius didn't flinch. He led the forums himself. He took the hard questions. He confronted uncomfortable truths. And gradually, the noise of resistance quieted beneath the hum of understanding. One evening, following a particularly intense forum in a local church, an older officer approached him outside under the amber glow of a flickering street lamp. "You know," the man said, voice gravel thick, "I didn't like what you were doing at first. Thought you were just here to make us look bad." Darius didn't respond, waiting. "Lumen sight. But I watched you take it. I saw what they did to you. And you still showed up here like this place mattered. Like we mattered. That means something." Darius nodded. "It means everything." Back in New York, Reed testified again, this time before a congressional subcommittee focused on police reform. His testimony was sobering. "I saw it happen in real time," he said, "and I didn't stop it. That's on me. But what's worse is how normal it felt. Like it wasn't even a question. That's what we have to change." After the hearing, Reed reached out to Darius. The two met quietly in a coffee shop near Central Park. No press, no statements. Just two men, sitting across from each other with the weight of 6 days and years of institutional rot between them. Reed apologized, not in grand language, but with sincerity. Darius accepted it, not because he was expected to, but because he knew the difference between regret and transformation. "You saw the lie," Darius said. "You stepped into the truth. That's what matters now." Months passed. Operation Groundwork expanded into 5 more cities. Darius was invited to sit on a national advisory board overseeing procedural reform. He accepted, but only on the condition that at least one seat always be reserved for a civilian impacted by misconduct. "The people we serve must be in the room where service is defined," he said. 1 year after his arrest, the FBI held a closed-door ceremony. There were no cameras, no reporters, just agents, leadership, and staff gathered to recognize not the suffering Darius endured, but the strength he embodied. Beck, in his brief remarks, said, "We honor our own not because of their rank, but because of the truth they carry. And in this room, no truth is more sacred than justice." Darius spoke last. His words were not triumphant, but clear. "What happened to me was not an anomaly. It was the inevitable result of unchecked bias and institutional arrogance. But what we do now, that's the legacy we choose. The badge doesn't make you right. Your actions do. And your silence when others suffer is not neutrality. It's permission. We cannot permit injustice to hide behind procedure." He paused. "I forgave those who wronged me not because they asked, but because holding on to hate would chain me to their ignorance. But I will never forget, and neither should any of you." After the ceremony, Darius returned to his new post. That night, he walked the precinct hallway alone, his reflection catching in the glass of the briefing room. He didn't see a victim. He saw a sentinel. The city moved outside, sirens, footsteps, life pressing forward. He placed a hand on the door and entered, ready for another day. Somewhere in Midtown, the cell he had been held in now sat empty. The bars remained. The camera still hung. But the silence it held was no longer a sentence. It was a reminder that truth, even when buried, does not die. It waits. And when it returns, it brings with it the weight of change. Darius Bell didn't just survive the system. He rebuilt it. And in doing so, he proved that justice, real justice, is not loud or swift. It is steady. It is earned. And it never forgets. The end. If you found this story powerful or thought-provoking, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes filled with suspense, emotion, and meaning. I'd love to hear what you think. What was your favorite moment in the plot? And how do you feel about the transformation of the characters? Also, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Your feedback helps shape the next chapters. Let's talk about justice, redemption, and what stories like this mean to you.